Hi, I'm bigcal and welcome to my world. Just 1 year ago, December 14th, 2016, I posted my first Star Wars books video, where I talked about the first Star Wars book I ever read. Now, exactly 1 year later, I thought it would be a good idea to rank each of the 21 books I have read in this 1 year period. Also, as luck would have it, today is also the day that the new Star Wars film, Episode 8, is released. I guess I was guided by the Force in releasing my video on exactly this date last year. Either that or it's a complete coincidence. I'ma choose to believe the Force was involved. Anyway, time to begin the countdown. Just a quick note first, the Darth Vader comics will not be included in this list as, well, it's kinda hard to rank comic books alongside an actual book. Or at least it is for me. Those are totally awesome though, so definitely check them out for sure. And, of course, be warned, spoilers! Spectre of the Past. The first book in the Hand of Thrawn duology, Spectre of the Past, isn't exactly a bad book, but my least favourite of what I've read due to it being a bit of a mess. Too many stories happen at the same time that don't seem to connect together until the second book, leaving this first book a little confusing. Still recommended though, but of course you do need the second book to go along with it. Before the Awakening. Taking place before Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, if you couldn't figure that out already. Before the Awakening is a series of 3 short stories focusing on the 3 new main protagonists from the film. While these stories help us understand the characters of Rey, Finn and Poe Dameron a little more, the problem lies with the fact that they are just short stories. A fun read, but not really much more than that. The Weapon of a Jedi. Another somewhat short story, this book tells the tale of when Luke Skywalker first used his lightsaber in an actual fight, sometime after the events of A New Hope. Again, its main problem is that it's only a short story and isn't fleshed out in the way that you might hope. An interesting story, no doubt, but with so many other fantastic books, this one unfortunately had to be low on the list. Moving Target. Yet another short story. In fact, this, along with numbers 19 and 20, are all part of a Journey to the Force Awakens book series. This time set right before the Battle of Endor. Princess Leia gathers a crew together to try and distract the Empire while the Rebel fleet readies themselves to attack the second Death Star. The most interesting story from the Journey to the Force Awakens series, and well worth the read as things don't quite play out as you would expect. Again, sadly, far too many other books just so happen to be better, hence a low placement for this one. Shadows of the Empire. No doubt anyone who has read this one will think I'm crazy for featuring it so low on the list. When I was looking for book recommendations, this one would always show up in top 10 lists, usually in the top 3. I finally got it and read it, and well, the story is really interesting. I like Vader and Prince Izor secretly battling each other behind the Emperor's back, and how Luke becomes a pawn in their game for the Emperor's approval. However, I cannot bring myself to list the book any higher due to the fact I kinda hated the author's writing style. I can't quite explain it, but I find myself really struggling to continue on at times due to how things were written. I'm guessing this isn't a problem for most people, but for me it really drags the overall reading experience down. The Last Command. The final book in the rather incredible Thrawn trilogy. Everything comes together wonderfully from the first 2 books and leaves us with plenty to wonder about in the future, which is addressed in many ways in the Hand of Thrawn duology. The final battle between Mara, Luke, Seaboth and another Luke is a great way to cap off the trilogy. My biggest gripe with the book though is how they end Thrawn himself. For such an amazing character, his end is underwhelming, and as a result there are many other books I enjoyed more overall. The Jedi Path. The Jedi Path isn't your typical Star Wars book. It isn't a story, but instead a manual handed down from generation to generation. It teaches you the Jedi Code, shows all the lightsaber forms, and goes into depth on all things Jedi Order. The main selling point for me, though, are the annotations made by Jedi who once possessed the book, then Emperor Palpatine who took it following Order 66, and finally Luke Skywalker who is in current possession of it. A great insight into the Jedi Order and what certain Jedi thought of certain topics and issues. Sadly though, this might have actually lessened my opinion on the Jedi, as they do come across just as narrow-minded as Palpatine claims them to be in the films. Vision of the Future, the second and final book in the Hand of Thrawn duology. The first book happens to be the lowest ranked book on this list. However, the big mess from the first book is rectified here. Everything just comes together wonderfully. All the different stories now connect and make sense and are exciting to read about. The book also gets even better after reading a certain upcoming book that essentially acts as a prequel to the entire Thrawn saga. Ahsoka. The former Padawan of Anakin Skywalker, Ahsoka Tano quickly became one of my favourite Star Wars characters during my viewings of the Clone Wars TV show. When I first started getting into Star Wars books, I thought to myself how great it would be to get one all about Ahsoka. Then I discovered there was one and I just had to have it. Part of me has to admit to being a little disappointed with the book, as I wanted it to be about Ahsoka after she left the Jedi Order, but before Order 66. Instead, we have a couple of flashbacks to one mission prior to Order 66, and the rest of the book focuses on her life after the Empire have taken over. But putting my disappointing hopes aside, what we got is still great. We'll learn more about Ahsoka as a character, we are introduced to an Inquisitor for the first time, and we even discover the origins to her unique white lightsabers, and how she gets involved with Bail Organa and the Rebellion. A must-read for fans of the Clone Wars and Rebels TV show for certain. Survivor's Quest. I mentioned the Thrawn Saga a couple of books ago, and I guess I should clarify. We have the Thrawn trilogy books, and then we have the Hand of Thrawn duology of books. Then there are two other books that, well, act as bookends to the whole Thrawn Saga. This one happens to be the last of these books, taking place long after Thrawn has died, but still focuses on things that he had a direct influence over when he was alive. Before the fall of the Jedi, a ship called Outbound Flight was set to take a group of Jedi and non-Jedi into the unknown regions, so that they might colonize new planets and begin to expand the Jedi Order. However, things don't go as expected and the ship is destroyed. Or so everyone thought. Luke Skywalker and others are contacted by the Chase and invited to come along to where the ship has been found, so that they might look around and sort out a way of returning the ship to the New Republic. Along the way are many twists and turns, with friends and enemies being all around, and nothing being quite what it seems. I describe this book more as a detective novel than a typical sci-fi adventure book, and that in no way makes it worse than your normal Star Wars book. Rule of Two. When I started reading Star Wars books, two trilogies of books were constantly being recommended to me, the Thrawn trilogy and the Darth Bane trilogy. I went for the Thrawn trilogy first, then only recently decided to delve into the Bane trilogy. Rule of Two happens to be the second book. As I'm sure most of you are aware, Darth Bane created the Rule of Two for the Sith. Instead of spreading power between many, only two Sith should ever exist at once. A master to embody power and an apprentice to crave it. Only when the apprentice is strong enough can they strike down their master and become a master themselves, thus ensuring that the Sith only get stronger over time. Being the middle book, we get a strong focus on Bane and his apprentice, how they interact with each other, and how they begin to set things in motion to eventually take down the Jedi. Their plans are almost ruined when a handful of Jedi discover their existence, but how they deal with it is utterly fantastic. Worthy of being in anyone's top 10 list, but just misses out on mine, though it really is a shame because this book is incredible. Heir to the Empire. We kick off my top 10 Star Wars books with the first book in the Thrawn trilogy, a perfect fit. This book introduced the world to Grand Admiral Thrawn, and the Star Wars universe has never been the same since. A tactical genius, Thrawn single-handedly turns the tide of the war back into the favour of the Empire, even with the Emperor, Vader and the Death Star being long gone. The book also introduces Mara Jade, with plenty of mystery surrounding her backstory that would later be revealed. A few other story arcs are set up here, but unlike the first book in the Hand of Thrawn duology, nothing feels confusing or messy whatsoever. Dark Force Rising, the second book in the Thrawn trilogy. Now things are really starting to pick up, with certain plans being set into motion that could change the tide of the war even further. An army of lost ships, a clone Jedi Master who may or may not be insane, potential new allies for Leia, more information into Mara Jade's history, and of course plenty more Thrawn. This is the Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy for sure. Lords of the Sith. While on their way to Ryloth, rebel forces, led by Cham Syndulla, father of Heir Syndulla, attack Vader and the Emperor's ship and cause it to crash. With both men still alive, they scramble to find them and finish them off. The book is kind of like a twisted version of a buddy cop film, with Vader and Palpatine having to rely on each other to survive, and along the way kill as many things as possible. Palpatine is one of my all-time favourite characters from the Star Wars universe, so getting to see, or rather read about him in a situation like this is a real treat. Usually Palpatine is behind a desk discussing politics, or sat in a chair giving out orders to Vader and others. Here, he's in the wild on a planet full of people and creatures trying to kill him, and his relationship with Vader is put to the test at times. One of the first books I read last year and still a firm favourite, which you may have guessed given its high placement. Outbound Flight. Remember that Thrawn saga I keep mentioning? This book here is the bookend that starts the whole saga off. Only it was written last, and in my opinion should be read last, to serve as a prequel that ties so much together. While we found out a fair amount about the Outbound Flight in Survivor's Quest, many questions were still unanswered. Here we get those answers. We finally discover Thrawn's full involvement. We learn a lot more about Jedi Master C'baoth before he was killed, cloned and insane. We also learn the origins of a very mysterious figure from the Hand of Thrawn duology, which I didn't even realise at first. Wonderfully written by Timothy Zahn as usual, Outbound Flight is the perfect beginning and ending to the 7-book Thrawn saga that is sadly now no longer canon. Dynasty of Evil. The third and final book in the Darth Bane trilogy, Dynasty of Evil, is yet another perfect end to a series of books. Bane is getting older and starting to break down physically, all the while wondering if his apprentice will ever challenge him for the title of Master. His apprentice, meanwhile, is thinking about challenging him, but wishes to find an apprentice first. Both Sith begin to drift apart as Bane goes out on his own to seek immortality in order to continue his vision, while his apprentice secretly looks for an apprentice of her own while waiting for the right time to kill her master. The entire book sets up their fight, and that is how it ends. The author even puts in a little tease that Bane actually transferred his essence into his apprentice, giving him immortality that way, but sadly this was confirmed as nothing more than a fun tease. However, the separate stories of both Sith searching for something and building up to a confrontation between the two is excellently done, and I found myself reading longer than usual just so I could get to those final chapters and see how everything ended. Path of Destruction. And here we have the beginning of the Darth Bane trilogy. We get a great backstory on Bane, such as his real name and where his power originated from, and how he joined the Sith army as just an ordinary soldier at first. A great rise to power story, and a great showcase for how powerful Bane is, but also how intelligent he can be, as he slowly begins to realise that the Sith are not what they should be, and instead should follow his new rule of two idea. He manipulates events that lead to the end of the Great Jedi and Sith War, and from there begins his 1,000-year-long plan to eradicate the Jedi once and for all. Darth Bane quickly became a favourite of mine just from this book alone. Book of Sith. The companion book for the Jedi Path. However, this isn't so much a manual on the Sith Order, but various scrolls and texts collected over the years and brought together into a single book by Palpatine. War accounts from a Sith during one of the many battles against the Jedi, the teachings of Darth Bane, how the Night Sisters use the dark side, the scientific look at the Force from Plagueis, and even some texts written by Palpatine himself. Again, plenty of annotations from previous owners including Dooku, Ventress, Palpatine and the current owner Luke Skywalker. Some of the texts included were stored in the Jedi Temple for a while too, and even have Jedi annotations here and there as well. This is just such a cool collection of Sith texts and helps you understand them more, and the presentation is wonderful too. Each different piece of text or scroll has a different look and feel, making you believe that it was from something else and stuck together here. I know which side I want to be on after reading this. Thrawn. With the epic 7-book Thrawn saga now being legends and no longer canon, it was unclear if Thrawn would be brought back into the new Star Wars universe. Thankfully, thanks to Star Wars Rebels, Thrawn is officially canon again, only his story is now a little different. To help us with this, Timothy Zahn returns once again to write one of the best characters. Here we get a detailed account of how Thrawn was found by the Empire and why he agreed to join with Palpatine. We join him through his days at the Academy, learning the rules and structure of the Empire more than anything, as he was already far more qualified to be an officer than most already in those positions. From there, he continues to rise up through the ranks, showing off his brilliance when it comes to military tactics, but also detailing his weaknesses when it comes to politics. This introduces us to Governor Pryce, another character from Star Wars Rebels, and how she too rises the ranks and how she and Thrawn forge an alliance. Excellently written as per usual from Zahn, and helps bring Thrawn back into the universe with the same character and genius as before, just with an altered story. I absolutely cannot wait for the second book next year. Tarkin. Grand Moff Tarkin was a unique character back in the original Star Wars film. While Vader was going around killing who he wanted and barking orders, it seemed that only Tarkin had any sort of control over him. Technically, only having to answer to his master, the Emperor, Vader still listened to Tarkin and did as he asked. At the very least, this showed that the two had mutual respect for each other. This book goes into detail on why that is, and it fits in perfectly with the backstory of Tarkin that makes up the bulk of this book. While some may believe Tarkin to just be another pencil pusher who rose through the ranks of the Empire by playing politics, this book does everything to prove those people wrong. His upbringing had much hardship which moulded him into the man he became, and his rise to power was through his skill and intellect, which attracted Palpatine to him too. We even discover the origins of the Grand Moff position, which never existed prior to Tarkin being made one. An amazing story and a great insight into yet another of my favourite characters. Darth Plagueis. Did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise? Such intrigue was built from that one line in Star Wars Episode 3, as Palpatine would tell Anakin a story of his master. Just who was Plagueis? Could he really keep those he loved from dying? When I first decided to dive into the world of Star Wars books, this was number one on my list to read. The first one I got, and a year later, remains my absolute favourite book too. Plagueis is such an interesting character, having been the product of two Force-sensitive Moonalists forced to mate, so that Darth Tenebrous may gain an apprentice. From there, Plagueis would show more of an interest in the science behind the Force and how the midichlorians actually work, which would lead him to learning how to manipulate them. We get to find out how he discovered Palpatine and how he trained him too. It was Plagueis who pushed Palpatine into the world of politics, knowing that that was the way to control the galaxy and defeat the Jedi. His work with midichlorians and his plans to control the Senate actually made me enjoy the Star Wars prequels that little bit more, as I had more information to draw on. Any book that can make me like midichlorians and politics deserves the number one position for that alone. But combine that with great characters and abundance of Palpatine, something we get far too little on in these books, and all the seeds it begins to sow for future events that we eventually see in the prequels, and what we end up with is, in my opinion, the greatest Star Wars book I have ever read. And there you have it, all 21 Star Wars books I read in the past month ranked from least favourite to favourite. I have already begun reading more, so this time next year expect another list. Can Darth Plagueis be topped? I guess we'll just have to find out together. So, I'm bigcal, thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.